Yeah. Okay, what's your next one?
Just very quickly, it's just an update. We met with Alistair Castles about the tanneries plans.
Cool. Yep.
And better understand his proposals for a cycle path, wharf, bridge, and there's nothing in the district plan that would create an obstacle to those proposals. He may need resource consent from Environment Canterbury, but there's nothing in the proposed plan in the commercial chapter or industrial chapters that.
No. And certainly in terms of the area plan approach that we might look to do for the Woolstons and various other areas, he was very keen to be involved in that when that came forward in a year or so's time. So at this stage, comfortable with where we're at.
So he could get started now if he wanted to.
Yeah, as Mark says, just it's really a regional council, and there might be some function for council as a road owner or some of those other.
Regional council in relation to the river use, is it?
Yes. So if there are discharges and those sorts of things associated with the bed of the river, then that's the regional council. Yeah.
Okay, Yanni.
So he was comfortable with the current zoning on his site remaining?
The zoning we've put forward in the proposed plan is what was sought in part, what was sought in his written feedback on the draft chapter.
Which is industrial general.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was comfortable that the resource consent process had gone well for him, that the things that needed to be dealt to were well dealt to, and he didn't see any impediments for his future development with that zoning. He was accepting of some sort of process to go through, and that was fine. Pleasure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Right.
I just check what time, if any, we're breaking.
Yep. The mayor wants to do the one later. Oh, it's later now. Yes, sorry, Peter. Right. The next topic that's coming through to you is the residential, which is about the rezoning around suburban centres, the intensification, and also the new neighbourhood zone. So,
let's clarify. When Leanne said make sure they do that last, what was it the vision chapter?
The vision statement,
right,
and putting that into the introduction section. So,
okay, that's cool.
do you want to do new neighbourhood first? Does that work for you guys? Which way do you want to do it?
We're in your hands, so you can make the call.
Either way.
Put a microphone on. Effectively, the new neighbourhood zone is a generic new zone for new greenfield development areas. You'll be aware in the past that greenfield areas were released under a set of rules called Living G, and each particular area, well, I'll come on to that in a second, had its own sets of rules. It's at this stage really only going to progress 2 areas that are identified in the LERP. The existing areas of Living G, which have their own rules enshrined in the plan, they will carry forward until those sites are built out, and those rules will then fall away and become defunct. So this is really a set of rules for going forward. So why is it needed? As I've alluded to already, each previous greenfield area had its own flavour of Living G rules, and each time these were added in, it added another 80 or so pages to the district plan, and whole new levels of complexity and complication, which this plan is trying to weed out a little bit.
Can you just clarify what you mean by plan?
So the rules would be, you could look at them and you'd find it hard to spot the difference, but there'd be small tweaks that related to a particular area that, perhaps picked up a little nuance, but was it really necessary? Some of the assessment matters when you come to result. No, I mean, it's sort of picking up particular issues about local, the way a certain reserve might be orientated. Does that really need to be enshrined in a rule, or could assessment matters downstream actually be a better way of controlling that, rather than arguing that out up front and making it too rigid? Anyway, so yes, I mean, the plan change process was highly complex, very time consuming, and then further down the stream when it came to actually consents, if things had changed somewhere along the way, the rules were so cast into stone that it was very difficult to achieve a different or better outcome. And then minor changes, sometimes required, in some cases plan changes, but certainly perhaps over-exuberant resource consenting processes. So, alongside that, there are policy directions that point us in certain directions. There is the intention to make better use of land by increasing density coming out of the Urban Development Strategy, the RPS and LERP. This whole issue around promoting housing choice, I think it's fair to say that the types of houses coming out of our subdivisions are perhaps a little uniform. And I think really carrying forward some of the directions that were already being pursued anyway, ensuring that good development is achieved that connects to good transport and infrastructure networks, has access to good locally scaled facilities and amenities, integrated with cultural and natural and heritage assets, dealing with any residual natural hazards, and staged to fit when infrastructure was going to be made available. So those are all good principles that all development should follow. So those aren't new. It's carrying on those and doing those better where we can. And then in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, I think this is the area where there's scope for a real improvement. As I've indicated, the rules set some fairly rigid standards that really just drove compliance rather than good outcomes. The rules also, or rather the process of subdivision perhaps wasn't really keeping track with what markets or housing needs really are. There's a disconnection between subdividing up the land and then the house that's eventually built on it. There needs to be a greater integration of those. And the way that's done also perhaps stymied diversity and innovation. If you've got a whole set of cookie cutter size blocks, you're going to get, to be honest, cookie cutter size outcomes. And then really there's this whole issue around creativity and placemaking. Planning is a regulatory function, but it can also be a creative activity. Giving developers the opportunity to have less rules and more ability to bring forward good ideas that can be assessed rather than guided by rules, I think is an opportunity that has to be made available. So let's look at some of these in terms of visuals. Here's I suppose a classic current subdivision. You've got large lots at the bottom there with large houses. And on the top of the screen you have, sorry, I'll point towards those. So you've got your standard blocks down here of fairly large sizes with large houses on. It's fine. Those are obviously meeting people's needs. But the Living G approach latterly has introduced a sort of higher density areas. Sorry, this pointer isn't very good. So you can see the smaller lots up there, but they've still got the same large houses on. So what you're seeing there is a compromise on open space. And are those the sorts of homes that are necessarily appropriate here? Perhaps in an inner city, an urban setting where there are, improved areas of amenity, then, sorry, say that again. I'd rather not say. I don't want to embarrass anybody. I mean, there was for this area, yes, and it identified density A, density B, and density C areas, and you can see that, you know, the variants are here and the one that was in place, yes. And I think this is where I'm getting at, that the rules drive compliance. So those were outcomes fit within the rules, but was it really what we were intending? Perhaps not. So moving on to perhaps, I don't know, an area that might be more reflective of what we're seeking. You know, building areas that are, you know, develop a sense of place. This area here has got a mixture of back lanes. There's a street here, which is actually got a park halfway along. I don't know, actually. Somebody pointed me towards it, and I can't remember the names of the streets. But it's north of Yaldhurst Road, before you get to the racecourse, in that sort of part of the town. I think the river runs along the top of the image shown here. But yes, you've got streets here. There are still access ways round and about here for cars to get out, but this direct cut has been taken out. This street's been turned into a park. Here you've got, you know, a cul-de-sac, but off that you've got back lanes here, which means that, you know, these people here perhaps have, you know, it's still a private space, but those people can take a bit more ownership of that than perhaps a wide, you know, typically engineered street.
Is that a new development?
No, I mean, in fairness, that's a more mature area, but, you know, there, I think, you know, the rules were, you know, perhaps not as rigid at the time. Obviously, the area has evolved, and in fairness, in comparing the two, clearly, you know, the previous one has yet to mature in terms of its vegetation and all the rest, so it's a little unfair comparing in that sense. But if we can encourage outcomes that, you know, over time, you know, start to look like this, rather than being cast into blocks that are quite rigid and really there's no scope for change, that's got to be a way forward. So, what are the key changes of approach that the new neighbourhood zone is going to bring in? As I said, there's a single generic set of rules, and they're far less expansive. So the regulation is trying to control less things and give some more flexibility. However, they will still control the basics, how the structural layout of an area works, how that fits with, you know, typical standards and requirements that would be normally expected, but, you know, without perhaps some of the rigidity that was there before. And also the types of buildings. There will still be the need for, you know, setbacks between fences, you know, the way in which, you know, buildings relate to the street and so on. In terms of encouraging housing mix, there's an expectation that within individual developments, particular typologies are assigned to lots. So at the moment, the lots are all cut up and you don't really know what's going to end up on there. The aim is that at the subdivision stage, there is an indication of the type of unit that will go on there, and it'll be one of these four types. It will be a standalone house, which might have variants of 1-storey, 2-storey, or so on and so forth. It could be a duplex or semi-detached, or however you might want to describe that. A terrace, a group of terraces, or perhaps even an apartment building. By assigning those at that stage, you can be sure that there will be a degree of mix in that area. The absolute form of the house clearly is for something for further downstream, and that, you know, there has to be a degree of ability for the buyer or the builder to, you know, build. So it's not pinning down the absolute form, but it's at least giving an indication. And then, in terms of making that happen and dealing with this issue about control or creativity, there are two different consenting routes proposed. There's the traditional subdivide the land up first with some knowledge of what that typology of house that's going on there, and then a consent for the building. Or there's this comprehensive route whereby there's a single combined land use and subdivision consent, whereby the land really is cut up based on the building form that's going on it. So a developer can look at an area and think, right, I could fit a terrace in there, and I could orientate that. I could get a few more houses in, but I'm still delivering good quality amenity for those, you know, and helping to create something that's a bit more, it's got a bit more soul to it, perhaps, if that's the best way of describing it. So that second route really takes away a standard lot size. If you go down the standard route, your lot size has got to be a minimum of 300 square metres or 400 square metres on a corner, and that's it. You know, there's no flexibility there. If you go the comprehensive route and look at it all together and understand the relationships, there are no minimum lot sizes. You're proving that, you know, you're not doing the overshading, that people's privacy are protected. There are good amounts of open space and all the rest of it. So there's the carrot, if you like. I seem to have lost a slide somewhere in here.
Never mind.
That's okay. I mean, there was a table trying to explain. I think the key thing within this is that under a living G approach, you've got a complicated plan change process that can take 2 or 3 years. You've then got a subdivision consent to be gone through, and then you've got your land use consent. That approach is still available under the traditional route, although the plan preparation process will be much more simple. But if you go down this comprehensive route, there is a single stage consent for any given area, and that's clearly from a bureaucracy point of view, improving the speed of process. I see a hand up.
Can I ask whether social housing is part of the new neighbourhood zones, and if they are, how this might apply to that?
It might be, well, it's specifically social housing is not identified within them. However, that doesn't mean to say that, the likes of Housing New Zealand, community housing providers couldn't buy up lots within those. I mean, for example, a terrace might be created that creates smaller, relatively affordable units. One of those organisations could buy in and build those, and they'd be there. But in terms of asking that a development provides for social housing, I think that may be a step too far for this.
I mean, I like that, and I mean, I like the look of this at first glance. I mean, it's breaking up that whole sameness, homogeneity.
Can you just give me a wee bit of information about how the houses will be as affordable as possible? Like, my understanding is that currently a lot of developers say that they'll provide the houses, of course, but there's no potential for people, say, to bring in to shift an existing, often perfectly good house, say from the red zone, to be able to move that into an area that a developer's developing in any way. Is that because they're able to, keep them all standard, and is there a way, say, that council could ask them to waive that in order to make the houses as affordable as possible in these in the greenfield developments?
I mean, the current rules clearly drive things in a certain direction, and there are some standards, and sometimes, covenants are also applied, which also add controls that go beyond regulation. In terms of where the new neighbourhoods approach will go, I mean, in theory, if a subdivider, was approached fairly early on by somebody or groups of people who wanted to relocate red zone houses, lots could be designed to fit those, and they could then form part of that urban fabric. I think in terms of wider affordability, the fact that some of these homes will be smaller, and I don't think the term shoeboxes is always floated around when you say smaller houses. We're not talking studio flats or one-bedroom houses. I think these are just small, modest houses that meet people's needs, that are not extravagant, and that people can actually afford. People, there is a housing ladder which people can't be expected to go into 200 square metre large house from the word go. Sometimes you've got to work your way up. I think the difficulty at the moment is that the market is not providing that ladder for people to climb. And this type of approach, by assigning different types of homes early on, means that these subdivisions can deliver a greater diversity of homes that put those steps in the ladder back in.
Less than 300 square metres.
Absolutely. I mean, it's worth, I'll carry on just and finish the full presentation here, because it starts to look at some of that. You've got the Sprayed and Lodge scheme, which you will have looked at through as the exemplar a few months ago. As I said, the new process still requires that an outline development plan is put together, but this standard set of rules will then be dressed onto that. And then below that, there's the expectation that a neighbourhood plan for that area is put together so that there's an understanding of its structure. But when you get into the detail, and I think these are the diagrams that are probably more interesting, you can see the different colours on the different lots up there. I could duplicate these and provide these to you if needed. But the top ones there are sort of defining the different sizes of lots. So I think the lighter the colour, the smaller the lot. So you can, there are some lots there that are down to 120 square metres. Yeah. And whereas the purple ones are effectively apartment buildings that might provide 3 or 4 units within a building. And then there are variants of those, and the work behind this starts to understand the relationships between them, the shading, the privacy, different forms of access, shared access. And by understanding all that together, that whole block can be consented, and there are variants of the house which a developer could then build onto, and effectively brings forward groups of houses rather than cutting the land up and then trying to think, how does this house fit into this particular lot, and can I be a bit more innovative in how this is gone about? So, and then, like I say, this is also accompanied by the whole range of detail you'd expect. You can see shading diagrams there, access plans, landscaping, and then ultimately the treatment of the streets. I think the standard subdivision relies on the infrastructure standard set by the council. Perhaps in some cases, do we need to be looking at, can we create different types of streets that are not just for cars? Some of these streets that are proposed here are mixtures of still streets and cycleways, but also have informal parks and play areas in them. These aren't major roads that are carrying lots of traffic. They are effectively the lowest denominator of road that serves the house or the individual street.
Thank you. My question isn't so much about the way they're laid out on that. It's more about selecting the areas for greenfield development. And you'll probably be aware that last week Council, among a range of resolutions in relation to flooding, asked that in fact, that the upstream developments be considered in terms of the potential for downstream flooding.
Yeah.
And so, like, is there sufficient sort of teeth in the plan that when in fact it's pretty clear that an area had a history, for example, of flooding, that in fact that subdivision not be allowed in those areas?
I mean, the two sites that are being progressed through this stage of the plan are identified in the LERP, and they've gone through processes to some extent that prove all of that. In terms of new sites coming forward in the future, I mean, the plan change process does explore all of the hazards, all of the other implications, and clearly downstream effects on potential flooding is one of those.
I think, Councillor, there's probably a few chapters that have come forward to you that address that, particularly the natural hazards chapter, and I think you've got there some policies which were talking very much about avoid development and a non-compliant activity in your high hazard, whether that be a high flooding hazard or a rockfall or whatever. So that's one aspect. So any subdivision or development would need to be considered against that sort of policy. The policy is also in the subdivision chapter, and you'll find also within the new neighbourhood provisions of the residential chapter that there are also provisions in there about managing effects, A, avoiding your natural hazards, and B, avoiding putting your effects further on downstream. So throughout the plan there's about 4 or 5 different places that approach comes forward. See the outcome, yes. Correct, yeah.
Yanni.
So I think one of the really important things is that there's room for local convenience, like coffee shop, dairy. Yes. So I think that needs to be really clear. And also that part of the problem with our developments is that development happens, but the conditions or the things in the plans don't necessarily happen. So we have these ideals and they look really good on paper, but then in practice what happens is the things, the houses get built, but the other stuff doesn't. Or it gets changed to basically undermine the original intent. So what have you got in here? Because I really like this approach. The risk I see is that you don't have enough certainty, and therefore what looks like a great concept quickly turns into a pretty bad concept because it's enabled to kind of develop without being totally true to the intent.
I mean, each area is going to be different. I mean, the one we are obviously trialling and testing at the moment, is this Braden exemplar, and within that, it has this designated KAC, and I think, there is certainly commercial interest in bringing that forward. In terms of those sort of neighbourhood level, shops, stores and parades of activities, suppose ultimately the market is going to decide whether those are viable enough to bring forward at any time. You know, provided the area is identified, given the best opportunity to be marketed and made available for that, you know, and there may be controls that, you know, council might want to put into ODPs or other development agreements, then
What gives areas identity and character, it is corner shops. On corner sites you have shops that kind of express everything.
Perhaps
What's people, but in terms of the built form, like, it seems to me that there needs to be a special consideration around corners.
I think this topic got raised when we were talking about the residential chapter, and I think correct. And so I think you'll find in this zone and all the other residential zones is that provision for the corner, and we've actually widened it so we've not restricted to convenience, retail or anything. It's a corner site and it can be used for a range of activities. Those provisions would apply to this area as well. Exactly the same provisions would apply, as well as the specific key activity centre and potential for neighbourhood commercial areas.
So the other thing is that, just want to touch on the Phil's point, so it would appear, and we don't know, we're still doing work, that the current thinking around stormwater effects has been kind of insufficient to deal with the volume of events that we've had. So in terms of looking at the cumulative effects, are there any new tools that we're putting in place to have a much broader understanding about, you know, if you basically turn all the soil, all the wetlands into concrete, you know, basically what that means further upstream and actually along the river? Like, is there anything additional in here than what we currently do that can give us confidence that those issues will have more weight?
I think for two things. I've talked about the district plan provisions, but then there's also the process to get the rezoning in place, and you'll understand even to get to this stage there's been significant geotech and also stormwater management areas assessment. I think you'll have had either Graham or Mike Galuli come and talk to you about the whole overall plan for stormwater management in the southwest area, which has come out of the southwest area plan back in 2009, if my memory serves me right. So you start off at that broad picture. You then move down to this outline development plan, which is putting in place the main structure shown in the green sort of network as a mixture of recreation and stormwater. And then you've got a dotted green lines going through the centres, which is showing, putting on place here some of the detail of what the overall plan for the southwest area is. And then when you get down to the individual, start getting down into layers, you can see again that blue network is continuing through here. You can see that this development here, the blue network is heading to this corner, and here it is running through the whole proposed neighbourhood plan area. And then when you get down to a finer level of detail, you can see on this plan here, where you're looking at swales, stormwater management through the whole development. So it starts at the broad, works all the way through to the fine detail, and then ultimately into how streets are shown.
If I could just add to that, the council I think we've done 3 out of 8 stormwater management plans for the city, which essentially map out what we're going to do and what we need to do in those areas. And the matters for discretion in the subdivision section direct us to look at those plans when we're considering consent.
Could I just say, I think this is stunning, and this is exactly the sort of thing that we want to have happen. You seem to have confined this to 2 new areas.
Yep.
Is it possible that it can spread quickly?
I think the point made is this is, I think, the direction for the way forward. So any new plan changes that are made that bring new bits of greenfield land in, subject to all the assessments and everything else you'd expect, this type of approach will be available.
We certainly looked at the potential for it to apply to the existing Living G areas. There's a mixture there. Some of them, of the areas, are so well consented that there's very little left to actually that we'd apply this to. Sorry, I haven't got the report in front of me to go through that detail. But so there were some areas where the development was too far forward, or the developer had already committed substantially towards a particular development, so it was very hard to introduce this change.
And in terms of the ones that are currently going through, like Awatea and those ones?
So there's potential, the
Which may be a
Awatea,
bit
Highstead,
late, actually.
Highfield, which have just sort of commenced, then that's something we would look to perhaps work with the developers to see whether we can put this development into those areas. We haven't pushed that at this stage. Again, for that main reason, we're very wary that development has significant investment in a particular type of development, and in the current climate it would be perhaps wrong for the district plan to be seeking to impose a different approach on top of that in terms of the recovery phase of the city.
And in one of the earlier slides, you talked about a sort of one-stop shop for the resource consent and the planning approvals for everything.
Rather than a one-stop shop, I think it's a sort of a single-stage process. However, in working through this Spraden Lodge Meadowland scheme, effectively there is a small project team that is working this through end to end, so that there is consistency of advice right through.
It's actually one of the things in the housing accord as well.
Yes.
So excellent, that there's some practice. Tim.
Thank you. We went on a bus trip a wee while ago with looking at from Wigram right through and looked at the retention basins, Aidensfield, etc. And we looked at this side as well.
Yes.
And it's just, I guess, from Sparks Road, between Sparks Road and the hill, it just seems we've got retention basins, we've got swales, etc., leading up to Sparks Road,
Yes.
and then it stops. Because if you look at this picture, the top right-hand corner, the paddocks there,
Yes.
they do turn it, I mean, the whole place really does turn into lakes.
Correct.
I'm just concerned that it seems we've got a plan to Sparks Road, and then there's nothing, and we just kind of let it just get into the river somehow.
I mean, the Southwest Area Plan identifies, that area as stormwater management, and there is the wetlands there and
Yep.
various other bits and pieces. So I mean, in terms of development potential, I think it's going to be it's not going to be available in that sense. Is that where you're going?
Well, I guess one of the comments that was made the other night at the flood meetings is the concern about the management of the stormwater and the new developments upstream from the Heathcote. And logic tells you
Yes.
there must be some effect. And so at Wigram, we've got the retention basins, etc. We go right through Aidenfield's got
Yes.
them. We come here, we've got the swales, etc.
Yep.
But at Sparks Road, that all stops.
Yep. So I
And
think
that is the concern.
Yeah. It's a shame Brian or Graham's not here to give you some more of the detail. But in general, I think as part of that bus tour, we indicated to you that council actually owns most of the land on this side of Sparks Road, and that within the long-term plan there is funding available and programs in place which would coincide as this development occurs, that then the development on the other side would occur. So I think the first one, just sitting in here, there's a stormwater system here which is already in place, so that's part of that moving across from the Aidenfield through to the Henderson's Basin area here, and you'll see any maps that we have in the district plan show that whole Henderson Basin basically as a flood ponding, flood retention area. So that's what Andrew was saying, is that those programs are all in place, those plans are there.
Because one of the differences between the Heathcote River and the Avon River is the Heathcote River has a real silt issue.
Correct.
So are there any filters or
Yes.
requirements? So there are on those, okay.
Correct. Probably missing from here, just within the site, there's potential, and this is a difficulty, that you can plan for stormwater retention, but until you actually know what the development is within the area, there may be ability within this development to manage stormwater quite well, so that the need to deal with it at the other side is taken away to some extent. So in this corner here, there is proposed to be quite a large stormwater retention pond in here, similar to the Awatea situation. But again, that will be just refined as the development occurs, and you can work out how much stormwater is able to be retained and dealt with on site.
It's probably just worth adding on that point that this site, it was included in the Southwest Area Plan.
Yeah.
It's also including some retrofitting, so it'll deal with more than its own stormwater.
Yep.
Okay.
It's picking up perhaps some of the catchment-wide issues for the Heathcote, including siltation basins, which Alan's alluded to. So.
Okay. Thank you.
I think this is stunning. Congratulations. I think it's really, really the sort of thing that we want to see for all sorts of reasons, not just the look and feel of it, but the fact that people sort of come first and actually it addresses some of the housing issues as well. Okay, so excellent.
Cool.
Awesome. Shall we leave it there?
That'd be fine by us. The next thing we'd just like to, after lunch, was just to take you through those intensification area around the suburban centres.
Yes. Yep.
And then we've just got I think the vision statement.
No, you're not
finished.
done. You're not putting any of those back, are you?
We'll have a look at the maps after lunch, shall we?
Just
There
so
are,
long
there
as-
are, if you want to look at the maps, over lunch, they are these A4 coloured maps.
Yes.
But John Scallon will take you through the detail of that and
Just as long as you
confirm.
haven't done anything around Riccarton. otherwise-
No, we'll confirm that we've met the intent of what the discussion was at the last workshop.
Awesome.
Make sure we've got place in the right place.
So, Ellen, probably a rhetorical question, but any idea, time estimate for this afternoon? What we would need?
Not really in his hands. What have you got to? What have you got to? Well, maybe you could just
Okay.
tell me what you've got. Those residential areas which we've done in large form. You haven't changed them dramatically. You haven't sort of done anything horrible. There's no nasty surprises there.
It's more a matter of just confirming we've understood
Right. Okay. We'll make sure that you have. Yep.
So if we just focus on that, that would be good. Excuse me while I just...
And then what else have you got?
Then we've just got the vision statement that the Mayor was interested in looking at.
And chairing. Yep.
And then we've just moved over definitions that haven't come to you in other chapters.
So bits of definitions and the vision statement.
And
So-
that's university.
Oh, yes, sorry. Okay, so we'll allow an hour for that, yeah. No, we haven't done it. The poor guys have got to come back, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get through easily, I think. 1:30, is that okay? Is that okay with you, Tim, for your meeting?